What reaction do you typically get from patients when you ask them to be part of a clinical trial?
What I try to explain to them is that it can feel like an interminable process, but having the most strategic and the most sophisticated approach to tackling the problem and doing the most appropriate thing for them is worth that extra little bit of time.
I wanted to ask you first about why there's reason to be optimistic or hopeful right now. I've heard a lot of your colleagues, not only at the MUHC, but also reading something from a doctor at the Mayo Clinic, and just saying that it's a much better time for patients right now. There's a lot to be optimistic about.
Yeah, I haven't been in practice that long. I started in 2015 after I finished my fellowship down in Texas, and the way I practice today is very extremely different from how I practiced just 7 years ago and what I was taught. So I think if I were to answer on the exams the old way, would no longer be correct, and that wasn't necessarily true in the 20 or 30 years before. There's always been advances, we've been making progress, but it's been much more incremental than I would say in the last 5 years. Mm-hmm. Huge changes. If you look at the Food and Drug Administration in the U.S., in the space of lung cancer, there are literally dozens of new agents that have been approved in just the last 2 years, making lung cancer not just one disease, but a collection of very unique diseases that have unique treatments. So now we're able to, and Quebec is leading the way in that regard, in terms of molecular profiling of lung cancers. Wherever you are in the province, if you've been diagnosed with a lung cancer, you have access to advanced molecular profiling, genetic testing to determine if you're a patient who would be eligible for one of these new treatments. And so that pace of innovation is just unparalleled, I would say, in oncology. So yes, it's never a good time to get a diagnosis, but patients have way more options in front of them now than they did just a few years ago.
And one of them that's become a standard of care, or that's becoming a standard of care, is immunotherapy. That's been a real game changer, right? Not just for lung cancer, for thoracic cancers, but all kinds of, bladder cancers, melanoma. Tell us a little bit how it works and why it continues to be promising.
Yeah. So, before, it was about 10 years ago that there was an article in Science saying immunotherapy was the new thing, and it wasn't a lie. It was true just a few years after, because it took some time to do all the trials, but immunotherapy is now a pillar of cancer care, the same way surgery or radiotherapy or chemotherapy or even palliative care are. And the reason why it's such a potent treatment is that it leverages our own immune system's incredible ability to recognize foreign living things, whether it's a germ or a cancer, adapt to it and kill it. Cancers are an abnormal growth, cells that have mutated, that come from us but have changed to grow out of control. And those kinds of cells are always popping up, and a healthy person's immune system recognizes it and kills it immediately. But a cancer develops this ability to put our immune system to sleep, so that it ignores the fact that this growth is there. And what scientists were able to figure out is the specific molecules by which cancers put our immune system to sleep. And that's what immunotherapy is. It's a molecule that's infused into the blood that awakens our immune system and gives it back its ability to recognize and kill cancer cells. So now you can combine that incredible power of the immune system with all of our other conventional treatments, be they surgery, radiation, or chemo.
And it's helping so many patients, and part of the fact that it's something that you can offer a lot of patients now that it's become a standard of care is because of some of the work that you did, right? You were a lead on a major clinical trial at the Montreal General Hospital as one of the many sites worldwide, but a really important site. And you were kind of, again, instrumental in making it part of the standard of care for patients. So how did that happen? How did you, what did you find, and what are the results that you were able to establish from those clinical trials?
Sure. So we've known for a while that if we can pair treatments that go everywhere in the body, like chemo, for example, with surgery, that we can get the best possible outcomes. But this trial, which was started by some colleagues down at Johns Hopkins, was looking to compare chemotherapy alone to chemo with immunotherapy as treatments given before going on to that surgical removal of the disease. I was fortunate to be one of the investigators on the study, and we really had a phenomenal team at the MUHC that was able to open the study really quickly, and we were able to recruit a lot of patients. We were one of the top recruiters in the world, which is surprising because there are sites in China and Europe where the population is much higher than it might be in Canada. But so we did very well, and that has contributed to 5 years later, when the results came through and we saw that by adding immunotherapy, patients were surviving quite a bit more longer and without recurrence of disease. It was very important to leading to those drugs being approved. So Health Canada approved the treatment. The publication came out in March. Health Canada approved the treatment in August of this year, of 2022. And the company, BMS, that produces the drug, offered an access program as of September. So across the country, we were the first country outside the United States to have access to this. And I think part of the reason why it's not usually that fast in Canada. Part of the reason why it was that fast is because so many Canadian patients participated in the trial. And that leads all of the regulatory bodies to believe that, this is important for Canadians. So
part of your mission now, having seen this, is to get more people to participate in future trials that may lead to these breakthroughs like this. And now everybody has access to this, and will not, the patients who will benefit from it, and with improved outcomes, right? So
that's right. So progress in cancer, in medicine in general, involves a partnership with patients. I mean, we need patients to give that gift of being part of trials, and it's a lot to ask of patients to be part of these things. There's extra tests, there's extra visits to the hospital that are required. And it's still a very small proportion of the eligible patients who will agree to it.
Sorry, what is the proportion?
It's well below 5%. It's somewhere between 2 and 4% of all eligible patients who actually participate in trials.
Okay. And I guess you were going to say, what are some of... before we get to those who have... logistical issues or may not want to do it for other reasons, what do people tell you? What reaction do you typically get from patients when you ask them to be part of a clinical trial?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's always a little bit different. Every situation is unique. But patients are generally coping with a lot of bad news, a lot of anxiety. The healthcare system being what it is, it's usually taken a patient weeks to months to get to a point of having a diagnosis and meeting someone who will finally treat their cancer. And so if they get any sense that there's going to be further delays, or that there's going to be more complexity to getting started with their treatment, which sometimes a clinical trial can introduce, they're really reticent about doing that. And what I try to explain to them is that it can feel like an interminable process, but having the most strategic and the most sophisticated approach to tackling the problem and doing the most appropriate thing for them is worth that extra little bit of time. And so investing a little bit more time early on to get the right thing and the most cutting edge thing can be a real benefit to them.
And you can't necessarily promise this is going to be extremely successful for you, right? Like, you're still taking a chance, but what's the payoff for them if it's, if it doesn't work for them?
Yeah, well, so I try and frame it in the following way. Like you said, you can't promise to the patient that by virtue of being in the trial, everything will necessarily be okay. Cancer is just one of those things that has so many unknowns and still is a difficult, like lung and upper gastrointestinal cancers are difficult to treat cancers. But when you're in a clinical trial, you have the support of a whole team behind you. You've become this jewel of great importance. Not that that's not the case in standard of care, but we recognize that that's a big gift that patients are giving, and there's so much value to learn for the future in that gift. And so there's a whole team that's built around each patient to make sure that they're followed through their care. Things have to happen in very specific timeframes, so there are no delays allowed in terms of surveillance scans, or things will be ordered in a much more efficient kind of way. So in many ways, by agreeing to be in a trial, a patient is giving themselves the opportunity to be in a highly regimented, systematic treatment plan that isn't subject to all of the risks within the standard of care setting, where it's hard to get through to someone on the phone. You don't know when your tests are being done. You're on wait lists, and that sort of thing doesn't happen in clinical
And at
trials.
the very least, you're getting the standard of care. You're getting
That's
above
right.
and beyond. It's not like that part's being affected.
Yeah,
right?
and there's just a huge amount of research that goes into making that new thing that we're offering in the clinical trial a possibility. So we tend to have a lot of optimism about what these trials can offer. Doesn't always pan out, but in the case of this trial that we did, bringing immunotherapy to resectable lung cancers, those patients who participated really ultimately benefited.
Now, some of them are alive today that wouldn't have been plain and simple.
Correct,
right?
And they got access to drugs that only really became available 5 or 6 years later. So, yeah.
And so now one of the things you want to do is, you cover huge territory. What are you want to offer these clinical trials to more people, but they're not offered in community hospitals.
Yeah.
It's in the university hospitals. So how do you go about doing that? What's your mission right now?
Yeah, it's a big undertaking, but equity and diversity is a hot topic nowadays, and it's important because if the trials that we do only really recruit highly educated, well-to-do white people who live downtown Montreal, they're not really representative of all of the patients that are out there, and it's a big issue with clinical trials right now. The people who do participate are not always representative of the actual people who are out there. So we have a great asset in Quebec and in Canada is that we have a public healthcare system, and there's equal access for patients for standard care things. But by pairing that great aspect of our healthcare system and creating a network of research that goes out to the community and offers these trial opportunities to patients who are further afield, by definition, we create a more diverse and equitable set of data. We allow a far more diverse group of people to participate in the trials, because a patient who lives 2 hours from Montreal is unlikely to want to make those extra visits and drive in through traffic and park downtown. But it's important to know how this treatment might affect that person, because they might be different from someone who lives in the downtown area. It also helps us increase the total number of people we put on these trials, which means that instead of waiting a year to get all the people we need. Maybe we do it in 6 months. That means that we might shave many years off of the ultimate answer and bring these new treatments much sooner. So there's a lot of upside for our society as a whole in terms of being more efficient with these research efforts.
So in terms of, bringing clinical trials to these community hospitals closer to patients, what do you hope that will look like for patients? Will it be sort of satellite teams? What would that look like? Yeah,
so I think it means leveraging a lot of what we've learned through the pandemic in terms of using remote visits, virtual clinics. It also means personnel to support going to the patient rather than having the patient come to us, or, as you say, creating these satellite clinics where the nuts and bolts of the research efforts, whether it's medical imaging or blood taking, so the patient doesn't have to get in a car and drive 3 hours into town just to have a blood test, so that it's done here. There will be certain things that have to be done in university hospitals, things like surgery or advanced technological platforms that can only be in certain places. And patients understand that. But a lot of the things that require travel from patients in clinical trials are much simpler than that. It can be as simple as filling out questionnaires about what their quality of life is. We have people travel in 2 hours to do that sort of thing, or to sign consents. So there's a lot of technological solutions that we could bring to facilitate that. And our patients are becoming more and more sophisticated in that regard, that they can do those things.
And so what do you need in order to facilitate this and to accelerate this?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, it ends up being money. I think the money is there to support those technological solutions, to support the personnel that's required, to facilitate all the contracts that need to be signed between hospitals, with industry who are helping us run these trials. And just to create a well-oiled, efficient machine, and to kickstart us into a mode where, instead of just reaching out to those 3% of patients who live in a convenient location and have the education and desire to be a part of the trial, to expand that to be, say, closer to the 20% mark. That has a lot of benefits for our patients. It has a lot of benefits for our technological innovation research platforms, for being leaders in terms of discovery at a global level. This means we bring treatments to patients earlier. And it also has economic returns, because patients who participate in clinical trials come with a lot of financial support. So industry or academic grants will pay for many aspects of the care of these patients to make it simple for them. And because that's one of the requirements in a research setting, is that there's money to support the research effort. And so the idea is that this is self-sustaining, that Quebec would become a very competitive place to run research, which means we bring treatments earlier, and we feed our scientists so that we can be leaders in discovery.
And just to close off, off the top, I was asking you about the changes that you've seen in the past 5, 10, 15 years with everything that's happening, these options that are offered through the clinical, what you're finding through the clinical trials, catching the, better screening, catching the cancers or at an earlier stage. Where do you think we'll be in 5, 10, 15 years? What are you dreaming of?
Well, it's very, like you said before, it's a super exciting time. I'm a surgeon, so my day-to-day job is to offer patients operations with the hope that it will cure their cancer. But by being open-minded about how these new treatments, these pills, these infusions can be so effective at eradicating the disease, we also have to think about being judicious about how we use these invasive surgical techniques, which, yes, they can bring cure, but they also bring consequences for patients that are lifelong. And so I'm hopeful that there will be some cases where all we need to do is get a good understanding of their tumor and pair it with the right treatment, and almost like a pneumonia or some kind of infection, we treat it with an antibiotic, and that's all they need. And I don't think we're too far off from being able to offer that. Obviously, the more we have partnership with our patients to do this kind of work, the more likely it is to become a reality. And it's incredible when you deal with patients day to day, how committed they are and open they are to these things. You just have to create an environment that makes it easy and appealing for them.
Okay, well, hopefully this helps. Thank you, Dr. Spicer. Thank you so much for taking your time and for everything that you do.
Thank you. This was great.